who's probably been sending you the most emails over the past few weeks. So glad to see everybody here on the webinar.
And I see we have about 8 people. What we'll do is we'll wait another minute or two before we get started in case there's anybody else joining us late. But what we're going to do is we're going to walk through what you can expect at the Advocacy and Policy Summit in less than 10 days. We're going to cover some logistics, some other information as far as how to prepare for your meetings with members of Congress, some of the issues we're going to cover. But I just want to say at the outset that everything we're going to touch on here, we're going to also cover more in depth at the summit itself. So if it's a lot to take in right now, you'll have plenty of time to absorb the information in more detail when we meet in just a week and a half.
Yeah, and if you miss anything or want to review anything, this will be recorded, and we will post it in my TESOL and send you a link through your email.
So as we wait for a few more people, just to do a little bit of housekeeping, if you could mute your lines, whether you're on the phone or on a computer, this will cut down on the background noise during the webinar and during the presentation. But we will have some time at the end for any questions you may have, so you can certainly unmute your lines then. But if in the meantime, if you could just mute your phone, mute your computer microphone, that would be helpful. But also, as we go through the presentation, you should see on your screen a little chat box. It should be on the little GoToMeeting menu, be towards the bottom. And you can post any messages or questions there. If you have one, like at the top of your head, you want to sort of get out before we move on, you can certainly post your questions there. And I see a couple people are posting their greetings from where they're at in the chat box. So please, a couple people introduced yourselves already, but if you want to just post your name and say hello in the chat box, that'd be great too. And I see a few more people dialing in now. So why don't we go ahead and jump in and walk through what we're going to cover today. So we just covered the beginning piece, the welcome. Again, for those of you who are just joining us now, I'm John Segota, Associate Executive Director for Public Policy and Professional Relations at TESOL International Association.
And I'm David Cutler. I'm the Policy and Communications Manager with TESOL International Association.
And we're going to walk you through some of what to expect at the upcoming summit in a week and a half. We're very fortunate. We have a great group coming from all over the country, and we have a number of people who are returning advocates. So there'll be a lot of experienced folks returning to help us learn more about public policy and going to Capitol Hill and talking to members of Congress. So what we're going to cover today is we're going to do a brief overview of the logistics of the summit. We'll cover the agenda in a little bit more detail, and then talking a little bit about advocacy, what the advocacy is, what the purpose of advocacy is, and then focusing on aspects of your visit with your members of Congress on Capitol Hill. So we'll talk about some of the details, some of the steps you should take to prepare for your meeting. Hopefully everyone has been already in process of contacting their members of Congress to schedule a meeting, and we'll cover some different tips and suggestions. And again, a lot of this we're going to cover again when we meet in person, but this is a good way to help get prepared and get your kind of, get in the right place to prepare for the meeting and the conference itself.
Right, so I'm just going to go over the summit agenda real quickly. I know what we have up on the website, and it's been shared with some of you, has been kind of bare bones, so hopefully we'll get into some more specifics and I can share some more details. And I'll have the full agenda ready for everybody early next week and posted in our My TESOL group. So we kick off on Monday this year. Registration and pickup for your materials is going to begin at 8 a.m. at the Hilton Alexandria Old Town. So if you were with us last year at the same location, we'll be right in front, just past the lobby. You won't be able to miss us. So starting at 8, you can pick up your materials, and that will go through 9. You can welcome each other, and there's a Starbucks on site. Grab some coffee while you wait. And then we'll begin, hopefully promptly, at 9 a.m., just with some welcome remarks from John and myself and some leadership within TESOL, as well as some of our sponsors. And that will go up until about 10. And then John and I are going to go over and do a pretty in-depth legislative overview, kind of give you really just a snapshot of where we are in Washington right now at the federal level as it relates to immigration, English learner policy, basically everything that's going on right now. And then we'll take a quick break, and we have Roger Rosenthal presenting from the Migration Legal Action Program. For those of you who haven't heard Roger, he is very knowledgeable when it comes to immigration and the laws that protect our students. And he is a really great resource, and we're happy to welcome him back again this year. We'll have a quick break for lunch for about an hour, and then the afternoon will be devoted to breakout sessions and then part 1 of our advocacy training. So if you are not sure what to do with your meetings, you're not sure what topics to discuss with your members of Congress, don't worry. This is, part 1 of when we really go over what it is that you should be speaking about, how to conduct those meetings, and really give you a better idea of what's going to happen when you meet with your members of Congress. So that is just a snapshot of day 1. Moving on to day 2, we have a great keynote this year. We're going to welcome the Assistant Secretary of OELA, the Office of English Language Acquisition, Jose Viana. So he's going to be discussing his first year as Assistant Secretary and share what he's learned about reaching out and teaching English learners during that first hour. We're going to follow that up with a number of breakout sessions. We have presenters from the AFT, MPI, National Skills Coalition, and some other groups. And again, I'll get you that full schedule early next week. And then this year, we're really thankful to have Representative Jim Langevin. He's from Rhode Island. He's going to be speaking for about a half hour before lunch. He introduced a really great piece of legislation, the Reaching English Language Learners Act, which is something that we're going to cover later in the webinar and much more in depth at the summit. So we're really thankful that he's going to take time out of his day. And then we've had some scheduling issues, actually. He's supposed to speak about his bill later that afternoon, so it'll be a really great opportunity for him to get everybody motivated to reach out to their members of Congress and sponsor this piece of legislation. And then we're going to have lunch, some more breakout sessions, lunch, and then the full afternoon is actually going to be devoted to advocacy training. So we're going to continue and follow up on day 1, and then get into the weeds a little bit with day 2 and start thinking about some concrete actions that we can take. And if you have participants from the same states, this is a great opportunity to get together and discuss strategy and make sure everybody's meeting schedules are set, and really kind of coalesce around the different messages that you're going to give to your members of Congress. And then Wednesday is the big advocacy day. So that's when you're going to go up to Capitol Hill. You're going to have your meetings with members of the House and the Senate, and discuss some of the talking points that we're going to go over later in the webinar and definitely mention a lot during the summit. And then in the evening, we're going to all come back at the Hilton in one of the rooms that we will have been using, and do a closing dinner and a nice debrief, and really have a nice opportunity to discuss what everybody kind of experienced that day, what some of the messages that your members of Congress gave to you, and really how you felt about the summit in general, and really your meetings on Capitol Hill. And I think it's a really nice opportunity for sharing and being able to let everybody know how everything went. So that's a snapshot of the 3-day summit. So some tips to prepare. Plan on making some time for your appointments. As John mentioned, if you haven't already, you really should be reaching out to your members of Congress. We have the resources in my TESOL and on the Summit webpage, various documents. We have a form letter for requesting meeting that you can email, just the tips step by step, how to make a meeting and schedule a meeting with your member of Congress. So all of that information is there. And if you're having any difficulty, let us know. But just know that it does take time. Members of Congress are very busy, so if you don't get an immediate response, that's very typical. It's very normal. It's very normal if you have to make 2 or 3 attempts to get a meeting scheduled. It's not anything personal, but it's just the volume at which members of Congress work with their constituents. So consistency is key. So keep on following up with those appointments. Review background information in advance. We're going to go over some of those materials on this webinar, and they will be available in my TESOL as it relates to issue briefs and just some of the things that that are affecting your students or your program, your fellow colleagues, whatever it might be. Review that and do your homework in advance and really come into it with maybe a general sense of what you want to speak about. And again, once we get you those issue briefs, be sure to just read them. It's nothing complicated. It's bulleted points. We've made it really easy for everybody. So really just take a look at that. Network, again, using my TESOL, it's a great tool to reach out. I've seen some great discussions, introductions, just looking for folks from the same state as you, anybody else who's in the same boat as you, policy or issue-wise. Again, really reach out to your colleagues. Everybody here is coming to DC for the same purpose and advocating for your students and your teachers and your programs. So it's a really great opportunity to network and make sure everybody's on the same page and utilizing that My TESOL group. And again, if you're having issues with that group, please reach out to me. I know a few folks have had issues with their logins. I'm more than happy to help. So just reach out and we'll get you all squared away with My TESOL.
Okay, so we've covered a number of details leading up to the summit, but just by way of kind of the bigger picture, and this is pretty straightforward information, and I know those of you who've come to the summit before, you've already are well aware of this, you've already engaged in advocacy directly. So as you can tell, obviously by the title of the summit itself, advocacy is a big focus. Advocacy is basically organized action in support of an idea or cause. Advocacy, I think, we all well know, is a big part of the TESOL profession and being a TESOL educator. And often it is used in reference to some of the activities that you're about to engage in terms of meeting with legislators, meeting with decision makers, and really moving on an idea or a cause. But it really can take any shape or form. I'm sure many of you have engaged in advocacy on behalf of your students just within your school, for example, or advocating on behalf of your peers at your university. And so it really can take many different shapes and forms. But in this context, we're really looking at working with and meeting with legislators and decision makers and educating them about specific ideas and important issues that are important for the TESOL profession. And for those of you this is going to be your first time meeting with decision makers on Capitol Hill, it can be intimidating, I think, at first blush. First time going up to Congress and walking through the Capitol Hill office buildings, you will see they're frequently very, very busy with a lot of activity. And since members of Congress are often featured on national news headlines, it's natural to be a little bit intimidated about the situation you're about to enter. But I assure you, and I think anybody who's gone through this before will assure you that there's really nothing to be intimidated about. What you're doing is you're really talking to members of Congress and their staffs, and think of it this way, you are educating them on these important issues around English learners and the TESOL profession, and you're using some networking skills to help share that information. And more importantly, what you're engaging in is your constitutional right. So really, I want to assure you, it'll probably be a lot more fun than you imagine. It'll be a lot less intimidating, and we'll do our best to make sure you're fully prepared to go to Capitol Hill. And we have many number of people come back year after year after having done it the first time, and I think that's a testimony to the experience itself. So really think of it this way: you're going to be educating members of Congress and their staffs on these important issues. Many of them will know a little bit about English learners and TESOL, but many of them will not have a great depth of information and knowledge, and that's where you come in. And really the key to this, thinking about this, is your goal is not so much to say, I went in, I had a meeting, we talked for 15 minutes, my job is done. Really think about this as the start of establishing an ongoing and relationship with your representatives and their staffs, because you bring an expertise that they do not have. You bring the expertise of a TESOL professional who's been trained in the field, who works in the field, works with students in your classroom, works on behalf of different kinds of programs, and that's a level of knowledge that they don't have, and you can provide that resource to them on a regular basis. So the goal is to be able to establish that relationship and have continued follow up with your members of Congress and their staff so that they can rely upon you to be a knowledgeable resource. And we've had a number of participants who've come and said that they've been able to do that they've had follow-on communication with their members of Congress, had meetings with members of Congress coming to their school, coming to their district, and that's really what the goals you want to achieve. So walking through some of the elements of the purpose of your Hill visits, as I've said, the goal is really not to just do the one visit, but really this is the start of establishing a relationship. I had a colleague who does public policy work at another association, and she was fond of saying that think of this as a first date. So you really, want to be fully prepared going in, but you want to be able to follow up and share additional information. So we're going to be talking to members of Congress and their staffs, and really want to demonstrate your knowledge and expertise around these issues. A key thing that you'll be doing is informing them about the impact of these different issues where you work. Congress works at a very high level nationally in terms of developing policy, but anything they pass, any laws they pass, need to go through a process of being implemented and developed and go to the state and to the local level. And often the impact that you feel in your universities or in your schools, they don't really know what that looks like. They have a sense of what the intention of a law might be, but what it looks like on the ground, they don't have that experience, but you do. And so you can really close that loop and provide essential information to them about the impact of these different laws and policies. And a key thing, and this is helping you to prepare for your meetings, think about over the next 10 days the impact of some of these laws in your district, in your school, in your work setting, because that's really going to be helpful in illustrating the main points we want to make. As David said, we will be providing detailed talking points to you to help you prepare for the meetings, and we will be giving you those on site so you'll have time to review them. But it's really impactful if you can say, this law says this, and this is what the intention of the law is. This is how I've seen it play out in my classroom, and this is the results. Because then you're really providing a real illustration of these policies in action, and those really carry a lot of impact. Letting representatives know about the issues that you face in terms of working with English learners or preparing ESL teachers, and the challenge around resources. These are factors that they're not going to know from their experience because they don't work in education. Depending upon their level of knowledge of education policy, they may have some sense of this. But again, it's providing that, we can provide statistics, but what you can provide are the stories, the anecdotes, the examples of how this plays out in action. And then as you're working, meeting with them and providing this information to them, you want to be seen as a key trusted resource that they can call upon in the future when they have questions. So again, getting back to that idea of establishing and developing that relationship with a member of Congress and their staff. So in terms of scheduling, we've seen on the My TESOL group that a lot of you have really jumped in and started doing this, which is fantastic. And hopefully everyone has started this process. But if you haven't, you still have time, and you should start moving on this as soon as possible. As David mentioned, there are guides in the group in My TESOL. If you go log into my TESOL and go to the Advocacy and Policy Summit group. There's a library section. You can download these documents. Or if you go back to the TESOL website where you registered for the summit, and on that main page where it has the summit information, you should see some tabs along the middle of the page, and one of them says resources, and you can download these documents there. And these are great step-by-step how-to guides in terms of scheduling a meeting with your member of Congress. And there's a draft letter and some other information. The easiest way to do it is to call or email. Each member of Congress will have a contact form on their page. So what you can do that, you can fill out the form and email them, or if you find the direct number, you can call their office. But if you don't receive a reply back within a day or two, do follow up again. As David said, their offices are very busy, and sometimes it takes a few days for the scheduler to get back to you. But indicate you want to meet with them on Wednesday, June 20th. We've set aside the full day for that. So really figuring out what works with your schedule and with their schedule. Very often you'll meet with the staff. The member of Congress may not be available. That's not uncommon. In fact, it's more common to meet with the staff member. But you never know. Each year we hear that, we hear participants say, I was going to meet with a staffer and the member of Congress suddenly became available. So she sat in on the meeting. So be prepared for that. But, meeting with the staff member is really the key, because every member of Congress has several staff. They rely upon their staff to be these sources of information and knowledge. So if you're talking with the education staffer, you're talking with the right person. And don't be surprised if meetings end up changing at the last minute. This frequently happens. As David alluded to before, Representative Langevin was interested in coming to the summit, and he was going to come one day at one time, and that switched to another day at another time. So, being kind of flexible is important. One of the other tips, it's not on the slide here, but it's in the tip sheets that you can download. We ask you to make at least 2 meetings, one with your individual representative and one with one of your senators. If you're working with a group, you can certainly go as a group from your, people from your state to go to multiple meetings, and you can coordinate that. That's great. A general tip, if you can plan it this way, the offices for the Senate and for the House of Representatives, those buildings are on opposite sides of the U.S. Capitol. So if one tip, if you can make it happen, is to schedule all your House meetings like in the morning and all your Senate meetings in the afternoon, or vice versa. So that way you only have to cross the Capitol complex like once. If you're going from House to Senate to House to Senate, you'll be crossing multiple times, which is, if the weather's not too bad, that's fine. If you're a Fitbit person or have a tracker, you'll rack up lots of steps, which is great. But just thinking about how planning your day, because it probably takes a good, I would say, 10 to 15 minutes, depending upon your walking speed, to cross the Capitol. And then you have to, if you're leaving a building, you have to then have time to go through security in the next building. So, planning them immediately back to back generally is not, you want to try to avoid doing that, because you never know what obstacles you may run into in terms of like security and everything. So some of the resources which we've mentioned a couple times, these are documents that are in the My TESOL group library, but you should also find on the TESOL website with the information about the summit. You can download these documents, and they provide a lot of the details which I've covered now. You should also download and review the 2 resource kits that we've published around the Every Student Succeeds Act and the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. Those are 2 of the large education bills that provide funding for ESL in different ways. And these resource kits really walk through this piece of legislation and outlines what are the specific areas that impact the TESOL field and English learners. So they're great references and resources. Are these in the library in the My TESOL group?
I'm not sure, but I can add them if they aren't.
Yeah, we can add them there. We'll add these slides to the library as well. But if you simply, and you can see, you might see on the slide there, those are links. I mean, if you simply go to TESOL.org/ESSA or TESOL.org/WIOA, you'll find the page where you can download these two resource kits. I encourage you to take a few moments to review them in advance of the summit. There's a ton of information in there, so don't feel like you have to digest it all. It's just maybe familiarize yourself with some aspects of those laws if you're not already familiar, because we're going to touch on them a little bit. But they will also be, every participant in the summit will get a flash drive that is jam-packed full of resources, so the copies will be on there as well. We will also provide to everybody a folder of information that you should leave behind your meeting when you meet with a member of Congress. It has some information from TESOL, some of our recent statements and letters and some other details. A lot of those you'll have the same information electronically on your flash drive, but we will provide those to you, and we'll give you some of the directions about where you can pick them up and so forth. But if you do have some information from your local district, your school, your program, and you want to bring that, we encourage you to do that, because a lot of times members of Congress, specifically in the House of Representatives, they'll want to know specifically what's happening in their district. We'll be talking about issues in the sort of big picture way, but if you can bring information like, this is, I work in a high school and I have information on the number of English learners we serve in our high school and the number of English learners in our school district. Or, I work at a university intensive English program that's in your district. This is just some details about the students we serve and the number of students we've served over the past couple of years. So please feel free to bring that information, and you can add it to the folder if you want to bring your own folder. That's great. Some of you will be coming as representing your local TESOL affiliate. So if you want to bring a folder of information about your local affiliate, please feel free to do that as well. This is certainly, you'll be representing TESOL International Association, but you'll be bringing information from your local state, your district, your local affiliate as well. So please feel free to plan to bring all that information with you.
And then as we follow up on that, just to talk about what to expect a little bit more during your visit, John mentioned some of these things, just that the member of Congress might stop in. Sometimes they'll be free for the meeting, as John mentioned. Sometimes I just want to say hello, say who's meeting with their staff member, get a quick photo op. Those are really great things to take back with you. They're great for the member, and they're great for you and your affiliate or your school to just show about the advocacy work that you've been doing. Know that sometimes in Congress, especially on the House side, meeting space is at a premium. You'll notice that House offices are very small, and if there's already another meeting going on, maybe they'll put you in a conference room that's down the hall. Sometimes meetings will take place in the hallway, outside. I've had meetings take place on walks to the elevators. I mean, it's really really just trying to be as adaptive as possible. Again, don't really take offense to this or think that your voice doesn't matter if you're meeting out in the hallway. You see it more often than not that there's just not space and there's not room, and there's a lot of people advocating for a lot of things, especially with this session of Congress. So just don't expect that every meeting will be in a conference room or a meeting area. And also know that sometimes the staff that you meet with might not know everything about you, everything about English learners or TESOL or your affiliate, and that's okay. That's why you're there. Not every person is going to be an expert in the field. Sometimes you'll run into someone who, the staff member's spouse or parent is an ESL teacher, and that's great. It's a great connection to make, but sometimes is the case is that, folks aren't familiar with a piece of legislation that you want to talk about. An aide might not be, aware of all the implications of ESSA or funding levels. But again, that's why you're there, to educate that person, to put your teacher hat on, and really speak about those issues. So some things to remember when you are meeting with your member of Congress or the member of Congress's aide. Share your introductions, share who you are, where you come from, either the district that your school is in or that you're a constituent of, what your position is or what your role is as a teacher or working with exchange students or whatever it might be, and really make it clear why you're there. It's always good to share some of the challenges that you're facing, especially as it kind of goes around some of the asks that we're going to be talking about, maybe with limited funding or maybe with some of your students are a threat for deportation. Those types of challenges that you can share, but also follow it up with some success stories and how your program or how your students have excelled or become English proficient. All those types of things are always good to share and follow up with when you're meeting with the office that you're meeting with. So remember things to ask for. So these are the talking points that we've been referencing. We're going to go into a little bit about what those are here on the webinar and again at the summit. So we'll have those talking points and those specific asks for pieces of legislation or funding for other pieces of legislation and programs. It's always a great idea to invite the member of Congress to your school or your program. We've had a lot of success stories of folks who come to the summit who have made that relationship and who had that first date, as John said, and the member of Congress accepted and said when they're back in district they will come and visit the program, and it's a win-win for everybody. You get to show a member of Congress maybe your classroom or your program, and they get to get firsthand knowledge and see what it is you do on a day-to-day basis with your students. So always throw that out there, always follow up. And again, leave that folder with the education staffer that John mentioned that will have the different policy priorities that TESOL is going to be asking about, as well as just some general information about TESOL. And again, if you have it, any information about your school or program that you want to leave in the folder is highly encouraged. So be sure to leave that. So here we're going to talk about some of those asks that we've been hinting at since the beginning. So one of those is going to revolve around funding for the Every Student Succeeds Act, also known as ESSA. So the two big titles that TESOL works with are Titles 2 and 3. Title 2 is the piece of the bill that deals with funding for professional development activities for teachers, school leaders, and other school staff personnel. You'll notice it's been in the news before this past budget passed. It was proposed to be cut. Fortunately, it was saved. We want to continue to fully fund that Title 2A so that we can further prepare our school leaders and our teachers to work with English learners. And then something that you might be more familiar with is Title 3 of ESSA, and this is what provides that supplemental funding when you're instructing your English learners. And you also get guidance from the Office of English Language Acquisition, OELA, within the U.S. Department of Education. So funding for those two pieces of ESSA are very big for TESOL. They're critical for the field. We're going to get more into it during the summit in terms of specific numbers and specific impacts. You're going to hear from Jose Viana again, who leads that office, OELA, within U.S. Department of Education. But full funding for these two pieces right here are going to be critical. Again, we're going to be asking you to touch on in your meetings. So also what we spoke about, this Reaching English Learners Act, this bill that was introduced by Representative Langevin, who will be speaking at the summit. This is a really great bill and something that TESOL endorses enthusiastically, and fortunately we were enough to be consulted while they were drafting this bill and able to get our input on some of the things that should have gone into it. Unfortunately, they listened, and it did. So this bill gives additional funding for Title II of the Higher Education Act, the HEA, and it helps support the development of future English language teachers. So the funding would be on a grant basis, and it would be able to be used by schools that have teacher preparation programs for English learners, and to create partnerships with their local education agencies, local schools, and be able to create partnerships and opportunities for future teachers to work with English learners and to better prepare them to work with English learners, understand the different needs that they might have, and how English learners differ from just the general student population. So giving funding for that would be a great win. But unfortunately, this bill doesn't have any Republican co-sponsors. And speaking with the aides in Representative Langevin's office, this is what they really want. And this is what we're going to be asking you, especially if you're meeting with Republicans. Maybe a Republican is your member of the House, to co-sponsor this bill. And also, even if you're meeting with a Democrat from the House, this bill cannot have too many co-sponsors. So every Democrat has not signed on to this bill to be a co-sponsor. So asking for that. And this bill also doesn't have a companion bill. So that's like a sister bill, something that is basically a copy that could be sent to the Senate. That doesn't exist yet. So being able to get a senator to bring this bill into the Senate, introduce it as a companion bill, is another ask that we'll be having when you're meeting with a senator. Another ask that we're going to be going over, something I'm sure all of you are familiar with. It's in the news. I'm sure it impacts your classroom. But this revolves around DACA and Dreamers. So there's two pieces of legislation that are out there right now that TESOL is in great favor of, and that we're going to be asking you to really make these hard asks for of your representatives in Congress. The first is the Bridge Act. And what this basically does is it legislates DACA. As many of you know, President Trump recently, this was last fall, rescinded the executive order that established DACA. Right now it's being fought out in the courts, but it's not an actual law. It was just a executive order that could be implemented or rescinded. So this Bridge Act would make it an actual law and establish DACA something permanently, to allow those students who came to the U.S., I believe under the age of 17, to continue to work and study and live in the U.S. without that threat of being deported. So that's one piece of legislation that we're going to be asking you to lobby for. And then the passage of the DREAM Act, something that I'm sure many of you have also heard of. This goes a little bit beyond the Bridge Act, but is again a bipartisan piece of legislation. And what it does is it gives a pathway to permanent citizenship for folks who already have DACA, as well as Dreamers who might not be DACA recipients but are DACA eligible, and came to the U.S. before they were 17. So it gives them a pathway to really get that citizenship and be able to continue to live, study, and work in the United States. And again, we're going to go into this in more detail and provide you a more in-depth policy brief on both of these issues.
Okay, and there's two more issues that are on our agenda, which I'm gonna touch on quickly. The first being full funding for Title II of the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. Those of you working in adult education, I'm sure, are well familiar with this. Title II of this law provides funding to states to support adult education and family literacy programs. So this is the federal funding stream, the main federal funding stream that provides resources and support for adult ESL, ESOL programs in publicly funded programs. So this is something that TESOL has long advocated for, to maintain and expand funding for this important legislation, this important resource for adult education. So that is, again, part of our priorities for this Congress, and something we will encourage members of Congress to support and support that funding. And the last piece is, actually, there isn't legislation connected to this yet, but those of you who've been following some information in the news, and you may have seen information from TESOL about this particular issue. The Office of English Language Acquisition is an office in the U.S. Department of Education that oversees programs and resources for English learners and English language teaching. It is an office that is created literally by an act of Congress. You will see it outlined in the Every Student Succeeds Act. However, there have been reports from the Department of Education they're looking at streamlining the department and perhaps merging OELA with the larger Office of Elementary and Secondary Education. This is in response to an executive order signed by the president last year to reorganize the federal agencies and maximize efficiency and accountability. So you may have seen some reports in the news and some information from TESOL about this. The Department of Education has not released a public plan, or I should say has not publicly released a plan of what their intentions are, but there has been information that has been shared with members of Congress and some media outlets, so it's been sort of leaked. And one of the proposals is to merge OELA into this larger office. TESOL has actually been part of some meetings with the U.S. Department of Education and has been working with other stakeholder organizations that we do not support this proposal. The concern is that merging this office, either merging it entirely so the office no longer exists, or reorganizing it in a way that it is sort of playing a downgraded role. I think our concern is that it will diminish its impact, and as all of us are well aware, English learners still are not quite performing in public schools on the same level as their peers who are native English speakers. There's still a long way to go in terms of educational equity, and so this office is still needed. The population continues to grow. Many states continue to report they need to have. There's a shortage of qualified ESL and bilingual educators. So it really would be, I think, a move in the wrong direction to either merge this office with another or downgrade it within the U.S. Department of Education. So what our ask is that we're urging Congress to exercise its oversight authority, and in terms of any proposals to reorganize this particular office, the U.S. Department of Education, a number of members of Congress have sent a letter saying that they are not supportive of this proposed move. We will have more information at the summit and some of the details. Over the next week, we're expecting this coalition that I mentioned to have some more information and some more details about that ask. So this is the sort of the last issue. And just to move on, we've just given you a lot of information in a short dosage, and it's probably a lot to take in. So as we've mentioned a couple of times, we will have much more detailed information and talking points and one-pagers on all these things that we will go over during the summit, so you have a lot of time to absorb this in more detail. But I want to stay at the outset. Your goal when you meet with members of Congress is not to regurgitate everything we just said, because that's a lot. And that's also a lot to ask in one meeting. So a lot of this information will be in printed format in these leave behind folders. What you really want to be able to do and think about as you prepare for these meetings is, of the different issues we outlined, do some of these issues impact you directly? Is this something that you can speak to and provide a personal example of how it impacts you? And think about maybe that anecdote, that story, that illustration of how that impacts you, because that then becomes your individual talking point when you meet with a member of Congress. And many of you, most of you will be working with groups within your state, and we will give you time during the summit to prepare for your meetings, where you basically, as a group, will think about, okay, this is how we're going to basically choreograph our meeting. You know, David will start off and do the introduction, and he'll talk about his experience as a K-12 teacher and ESSA. And John, I work in adult ed, so I'm going to talk a little bit about my experience there. And then you really want to spend time thinking about, okay, what's the one or two quick points I can make that illustrate the main issue that we want to advocate for. So we have here on this slide just some questions to think about. As I mentioned, of the different issues we've outlined, are some of those, one of those speak to you personally? Does your school or your district receive Title III funding, for example? Or if you work in adult education and receive funding from WIOA Title II, or if you work in teacher preparation and receive funding from Title II of ESSA, how might cuts to those fundings impact you? have your office, your district, have you personally had some interaction with OELA, and can speak about how important that interaction is of having OELA as a resource at the U.S. Department of Education? Or do you work with students who are DACA recipients and understand the issues, the challenges they're going through right now in this environment with the challenges that have been placed with DACA? So really, spend some time over the next 10 days thinking about all the different issues we've outlined, and maybe thinking about, okay, these are the 1 or 2 points I can bring as individual anecdotes to really illustrate these issues.
All right, so home stretch here. I just want to cover some logistic information with everybody. So just some tips for some basic information. TESOL will provide everybody with Metro cards. So that's the subway system here in DC that will take you to Capitol Hill. Where the hotel is, where the Hilton is, the nearest Metro is right across the street. So luckily you don't have to go too far. And if you're getting off at the House or Senate, there are 2 different stops you can get off at. We'll provide you with maps of Capitol Hill and the metro system when you arrive, so that'll be taken care of. Definitely leave enough time to get to Capitol Hill. I'd say if you have a morning meeting, I'd say maybe about 45 minutes or so.
45 minutes to an hour.
The metro is kind of notorious to be hit or miss, especially during tourist season, which we will be in. It gets pretty busy, especially with the rush hour. So 45 minutes to an hour is great. They'll give you plenty of time to get to the Hill and then go through security. Security, as you imagine, is very thorough, pretty similar to airport security, if not a little bit more intensive. I've had to take off items that I don't have to take off at the airport, so they're pretty thorough. So make sure you have enough time, again, another 15 or 20 minutes just to get through security. And as far as your meeting goes, I'd say the average is about 20 minutes. Sometimes it'll be a little bit longer, sometimes a little bit shorter. We've had folks who've had meetings that are 15 minutes and others that are 45. So, but I think if you zero in and think about 20 minutes as the average is a good thing to really remember and think about. So that's for just some practical information. Some other tips from some of our past attendees and our personal experience. So when you're going to the Hill, business dress attire is recommended. As you can see in the picture, women in blazers and dresses, gentlemen, suits and ties. Comfortable shoes are a must. There's a lot of walking. So, as John mentioned, it's quite a hike between the 2 sides of the Hill. And then even just within the different House and Senate office buildings, they are cavernous, and you will be walking quite a bit. Be on time. Just use kind of common sense and common decency. If you're running late, just as you would with anything else, call the office and let them know that you're running late, and make sure that everything is still okay. So again, practice that kind of civility and what you would want someone to do if they're late with a meeting with you. And we all know that the things happen, the metro is late or your other meeting ran over, so just be cognizant of the time. Stay on message. Really remember what you're there to do, what your talking points are. Remember that you're there on behalf of your students, your teachers, your program, and maybe not necessarily you don't want to spend a half hour catching up on sports or movies, things like that. Bring business cards, either the cards that you might have as a teacher. If you don't have them, I know there's some great templates in Word that you can make business cards in, or you can order them for fairly cheap. Do like Vistaprint or other things like that out there. Those are really great to just leave with the staffer. A lot of the times when I used to work at the state legislative level, just write on the back what their expertise was, and if I needed somebody, I would call them. So those are a really great thing to have. And again, be ready with stories, and going back to what John said about having that anecdotal evidence and having those experiences that you can speak about. Be ready to have a success story or maybe something that's frustrating you, and be able to speak about it, and be able to think about it ahead of time so that you're not kind of improvising at the meeting. So things to keep in mind as we get closer to the summit.
And just I want to quickly mention, so the picture that's on the slide you see in the screen, this is from either last year or 2 years ago.
2 years ago.
2 years ago. But these are actually TESOL advocates from Virginia, and they happened to be walking in us on the Senate side, and they literally bumped into Senator John McCain from Arizona, and they asked for they could stop for a quick photo, and that will likely happen. Maybe not John McCain specifically, but as you are having your meetings, your day on the Hill, you will undoubtedly see other members of Congress, from different states, going in and out of meetings. So you never know when you might have a quick photo op opportunity.
Yep, and usually they're always, as the evidence in this picture, more than happy to take a picture with you, and makes for a good story when you get back for the dinner.
So a few more. So some of the tips, some quick do's and don'ts. This is going to be some repeat information here. First tip, this is something you can do now, is do your homework. Not only some of the information we're going to send to you, we've sent to you about some of the issues, but spend a little bit of time getting to know who you're going to be meeting with. As you set up your meetings with members of Congress, and you find information on their individual websites, they usually have biographical information. So take a few moments to read their bios, read about their backgrounds, where they come from, what their education is, where they went to school. It makes for a great way to start the meeting when you find that kind of connection you have with that member of Congress. There's the saying about 6 degrees of separation. Everyone's separated from everyone else on the planet by only 6 degrees. You may be surprised to have something in common with your representative in DC. So if you're able to find that piece of information, that's usually a great way to lead off the meeting, because you're building a rapport almost immediately. The story I like to give is that for many years, Representative Jim Moran represented Northern Virginia. He was an alumnus of the same college I went to up in Massachusetts. It's a Jesuit liberal arts college. So I would frequently, when I reach out to his office or met with him, would bring up that very point. And usually it would immediately put the meeting in kind of a good space, because he's like, oh, I'm talking to a fellow alumni from College of the Holy Cross. That's great. So see if you can do some background information about the senators and members of Congress you're meeting with. And if you can find that bit of background information, it's really great. And as David also mentioned too, you never know when talking with staffs what kind of information they will volunteer. Every year we will hear from people talking about, they met with a staffer and the staffer said, oh, my mom or my dad was a teacher, or, my sister-in-law is actually teaching English somewhere. And, if they volunteer that information, that's a great way to build those connections and build a great rapport. Being on time is really critical. As David mentioned, the meetings themselves will be typically 15 or 20 minutes in length. It is not uncommon for them to go longer, but you really want to get there on time, preferably get there a little bit early. If you're running late, please call ahead. But if you happen to be in a meeting that was running really long, sometimes you can ask that office to say, can you help me call ahead to this office to let them know I'm running a little late. And if they're from the same state, for example, they'll usually be pretty good about that. Stay on message during the meeting. You'll have time in advance during the summit to, help prepare your talking points and prepare your sort of script during the meeting. And one of the things you want to make sure you be able to do is make a specific ask. The staffers, members of Congress will be expecting you to ask them to do something. And sometimes they will flat out ask you, so what would you like us to do? So be prepared with that. We will actually give you what those asks are. We covered them here as well. So be sure to do that by the end of the meeting. You don't want to, it's if you have a great meeting, you talk about a lot of things, and you don't want to find yourself running out of time, like, oh, we forgot to cover the important things and the asks we want you to make. So be sure to be able to do that. And as we said, include personal information, stories and facts and figures from your district, from your school, from your professional experience that will really illustrate these key points.
So following up and continuing with some more do's, say thank you. Again, common courtesy type things that sometimes we forget in the rush of things, and kind of the awe and intimidation that I know some people feel when they walk the halls of Congress. But these are just other people, other human beings out there. So say thank you. Remember, this is the first step. If this is your first time in building a relationship, if you're returning, this is continuing that relationship, and really being able to put yourself out there as a resource and become that expert in English language teaching or ESL issues or in the TESOL field. Things that you can think about and be conscious of. I think the better everything will turn out, both in your meetings, and then even more important than the summit itself is what happens over the next weeks and months to come. So again, leave that information folder behind. In addition to leaving your business card, always be sure to ask for their business card from the staffers so you can follow up, not just for this next part, which is a thank you email, but also follow up with any information that you might have. Follow up with that invite to your school program. Those are great resources to have, and you'll have their email and phone number instead of having to go through the office director, the office receptionist. You'll have that direct line to that staffer. So don't. Pretty much just the opposite of everything to do. So we're good there. Don't be late. As we say many times, don't be late. Don't be disappointed, as we mentioned before, if you're meeting with a staffer instead of the member of Congress. Again, it's more the norm that you're going to meet with a staff person, and that staff person is probably going to be pretty young too. So don't feel that if you're meeting with a 24-year-old recent graduate out of college that they don't know anything. That's not the case. So I feel like most legislative assistants on the Hill, particularly in the House side especially, are very young, but they're also very intelligent and very motivated, and very eager to please their constituents. So you are a customer, so to speak. So don't be disappointed if you're meeting with them. As I've mentioned before, don't assume that they know anything about TESOL or know some of the immigration issues that your students might be facing or budget issues that you might be facing. The next one is really key. Don't make up answers to a question. If you don't know, just say you don't know. I always like to say I don't know, even if I do know sometimes. It's a little secret. Just because it's a great way to follow up and say, I didn't know this when we were talking, and I said I'd get back to you. 2 days later, I get back to them with the answer, and it's a great way to continue that conversation and continue to be a resource. But honestly, if you don't know, feel free to just say, I'm going to research that for you, and I'll follow up. Let me get your business card. It's a great way to go about it. As we mentioned before, don't get off message. It's great to have that introductory piece, get some of those commonalities. But don't have that be the focus of the meeting. Make sure that you get to the points that you want to make. Don't leave disappointed that you weren't able to get that ask because you got off message. For the 18th time, don't forget to leave the information folder behind, and don't forget to again write a thank you email and just a follow up to thank them for their time. So one other thing that I wanted to mention is submitting your meeting schedule. So there's a link within this presentation, which we'll email and post. And then there's also a link on the resources page in my TESOL. And again, I think in several of the documents that are out there on how to schedule meetings. Please send us your schedule so we know who you're meeting with. I'll be up on the Hill on Wednesday to help folks if they get lost or just to make sure that things are going okay. And this is also a great thing because once you write down all of your meetings that asks you, location and who you're meeting with, your responses will be emailed back to you. So you'll have it in an email form, and everything's listed right there. So you don't have to, carry it in a notebook or, open up your iPad or whatever it might be. It'll just be emailed directly to you. You can have it on your phone. I'll probably be, reminding you guys over the next few days to please just send your meeting schedule, before you go to the Hill in 10 days. So once again, the presentation will be emailed to you. Have been recorded. Our emails are here. If you have any questions, if you're having issues, with anything really related to the summit or creating meetings with your members of Congress, feel free to reach out to us. Feel free to reach out to me. More than happy to help you. And I think we have a few minutes here. I don't know if folks have been asking questions in the chat box, but we're more than welcome to take any questions that folks have right now.
Yeah, we can spend a few extra minutes if anybody has any questions, if you want to either post it in the chat box, or if you are if you want to unmute your microphone or your phone and ask it now, we can, we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Are we allowed just to email you all the questions that we have, and you are just send us one back quickly like that, or you just want us to verbally ask?
Whatever you're most comfortable with. If you want to ask us now, that's great. If you'd rather email them to us, we're happy to take them that way too.
Okay, thank you.
Just if a few of the questions that were asked on the chat, one was about the Metro cards and Metro maps, which we covered. We'll be giving you that on site. And then also the leave behind folders that you'll take to your meetings. We will give those to you on Tuesday afternoon, so the day before you go to Capitol Hill. So you'll have that information, so then you can leave from the hotel first thing in the morning on Wednesday for your meetings. Sarah just asked a question, a logistics question. Are there places nearby for breakfast, lunch, dinner on Monday and Tuesday? Yes. The hotel has a restaurant. The hotel is near the King Street Metro here in Alexandria. And King Street, if you've not been to Alexandria before, we're in the section of Alexandria called Old Town. It has a somewhat colonial feel. But King Street is the main thoroughfare, and there are restaurants all up and down the street. And if if it's a nice evening, you can actually walk all the way down the Potomac River, and there's plenty of restaurants there. And I think the hotel will have lots of information about places to eat nearby.
Yeah, and there's also a free trolley that goes from King Street all the way down for dinner that evening. And just to remind everyone, lunch will be provided on Monday and Tuesday, and dinner on Wednesday.
Yeah, and then on Tuesday afternoon, we'll also, as we do the advocacy training, we'll talk a little bit about places to eat on Capitol Hill on Wednesday if you're want to have lunch there. Seeing a couple of thank yous in the chat box. You're very welcome. I hope this was helpful. As David,
It's been very helpful.
Great, good,
Wonderful.
Yeah, we'll be posting the slides and this recording, so you can have that information. And I know many of you who weren't able to join us live in the webinar but are watching the recording later, feel free to email us directly if you have any questions, or you can post them to the My TESOL group. We have a number of returning advocates who also have great tips that they can share as well.
Yeah, and there will be lots of discussion time both Monday and Tuesday for any kind of questions about logistics on the Hill, or just tips for holding the meetings. We'll be going over it for a number of hours, so don't worry if you feel underprepared for your meetings. We're going to have lots of time to go over it and prepare you thoroughly.
Exactly. So are there any last minute questions before we wrap up? So Harishini, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right, asked about can we print there. I do believe the hotel has a business center. You might just want to check the hotel website to make sure. I mean, typically hotels have business centers now where they should have printing facilities there.
Okay, I have one more question. One of my colleagues is coming who will be leaving from the Senate offices to go to her Amtrak. Is there a place to store her bag?
Oh, that's a good question. We can find some information. We'll try to find some information, follow up with you on site. When you go to the meetings on Capitol Hill, don't plan to bring a lot of luggage or bags. I think, certainly at the hotel you could check your luggage. It would just mean your colleague would have to come back to the hotel to pick up her luggage before going back to the train station. But we can see if there's maybe alternatives.
I think your best bet, actually, because if you wanted to go to the Senate, one of the closer sides is Union Station. And that's where Amtrak would be leaving from. So you probably want to see if Union Station has lockers or if Amtrak has some sort of luggage storage, something they can do. But I would avoid bringing any type of large bag to the Senate, and if it doesn't fit through the X-ray, they're not going to let you take it in. So.
Yeah, yeah. Someone else just posted a question about the bags question. Carmen asked about, we'll be giving you folders. Would it be helpful to bring a backpack when you go to Capitol Hill? Yeah, you can bring like a backpack or like a large purse or something. Anything that can really fit through like an X-ray machine, like you would in the airport, because that's what they'll have. It's a little bit smaller, but I think bringing a bag, and I'm just saying you have to put it through X-ray is fine. But since you'll likely be walking around for a while during that day, I wouldn't encourage you to bring lots of things with you. If you have suitcases will be difficult to bring into congressional meetings, or any extra large bags. But like a backpack or a large purse or something, or like an office bag, those should be okay.
Definitely.
Okay. I have another question about one of my colleagues who's in a motorized wheelchair. I'm assuming everything is accessible. Is there anything we need to be aware of?
That's a good question. Yeah, all of the congressional office buildings are wheelchair accessible, but depending upon what buildings you're going to, you may need to go to a specific entrance. And then also the metro system is fully accessible, but you may want to plan some extra time just in terms of just in terms of commuting and everything.
Yeah, the elevators for the metro are kind of notorious slow, for just being honest. So definitely plan some extra time in the metro. As John said, all the buildings are accessible. All of our events are accessible. There's elevators in the hotel, so I don't foresee any difficulties there.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah, if you have some information about your meetings already, if you want to email us and let us know what buildings they're at, we can see if we can find some information. Go to this entrance, which is the accessible entrance.
Yeah, and they're usually very well marked on the House and Senate buildings for who can go through what entrance, whether it's public or accessible or not. So.
Okay. Well, I know that Cat Davis has kept David in the loop on our Google Doc, so he has access to David has access to our Google Doc with all the meetings we've set up already.
Okay, I'll take a look, and we can always talk on site and go over the map and everything.
Yeah.
So for those of us who have not heard back, and I don't want to feel like I'm constantly sending them and calling, we just can send you an email to the individuals that we can't get in touch with or have not responded, and then you all can give us guidance at that point.
How many times have you reached out?
3, and I've called twice.
And they're not returning, or?
I have not received a return phone call nor email back.
Why don't you follow up with us separately by email?
Okay, that's what I was asking. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, sure. There's a good question, but follow up with us separately by email. We'll figure out what we can do.
Right, because this hasn't happened before. He's actually responded before very quickly. That's why I was maybe they're on vacation. I just didn't know it, or like.
Well, I mean, they were on recess
last
week, and I know some of the houses, some of the offices were slow to return, but this week should have been back to business.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you.
Sure.
All right.
Great. Well, appreciate your flexibility, and we've run a little bit past our time, but we've had a lot of really good questions. So I think we will sort of wrap it up here. But thank you all again for joining us and for all your questions. Just based on the activity we've seen online and the My TESOL group and here, looks like everyone's really taking the steps to get prepared. We think we're going to have a really good event. And as we've said many times, feel free to contact us directly with any additional questions you may have.
Yep, we look forward to seeing you in just over a week.
All right, take care, everybody. Safe travels. We'll see you soon.
Take care.
Okay, same to you. Bye-bye.